Okay, so now we're in the next section. Now we're about to learn how form submission works. So if you're new to this channel and you would like to follow along with the curriculum, the link is in the description. Let's get into it. Form submission. Forms collect data input by the user. As we learned in the previous chapter, communications on the web occurs via a series of HTTP requests and response. A form submission is an HTTP request sent to the server containing the values in a form. So, form submission, remember, it is a request. Now, trigger form submissions. A form submission is triggered by clicking a button inside the form. A submit button can be an input element with type submit or a button element. Both button types are in the below example. So here we have the form, we have the label, which is called username. We're nesting inside of that the input. We're giving it the type text with the attribute username. Now here's a comment. Clicking either of these will cause a form submission. Input type submit, button submit button. So when a form is submitted, an HTTP request is sent to the location set in the action attribute of the form. If the action attribute is not present or is empty, then the form will submit to the URL of the current page. All right, so what does that mean? So if you notice up here in the form, we don't have the attribute actions. So it doesn't, so to have that action attribute, we need to, that will help you submit it to where you want it to go, the attribute of the form. So let's say in the attribute you may pass it a different domain or something, but if it's not there by default, it's going to just post to the current page. That's what that means. Open up the following form within your browser. Now here we got the JavaScript project, user input form, chapter example, form submission.html. In the browser, type values into this input. Click the submit button and notice what happens to the address bar. Okay, I want you to play around with that so you can understand it. But let's look at the breakdown here. We have our head, we have our title. We're using styles inside of the file, inside the head. And then we have the body, then we have the form, action, and it's an empty action, so that by default it will go to the page. Label, username, input, and then type text, username. Same thing with the label here. The input is a text as well with the name attribute, and then we have the button submit. Now here's the output. When you go ahead and you submit whatever information you have, it's going to put it up here in the browser. So when you hit the submit button, it's just going to add it right here as a query. And we kind of touched on this a little bit, understanding how the pass work and how querying works. So it has that question mark username, and then John, what if John is what you typed into the inside the inputs, and then the team space coders. That's inside of your browser. This is what happens when you don't have an action for the form, or if you have an empty action attribute. Notice in the above example that the browser address has changed. See, we, like I said, it's just going to the file right here, and the information here had changed, because if you look at the first one, we just had the file, the HTML file, but once we hit submit, it added it to that particular file in the browser. Now the web address is the same as the form we loaded, but now includes a query parameter for every input with a name in the form. These parameters are known as the query string parameters. Remember that the form values are submitted via to the query string because the default submission type for forms is get. In the next section, we will soon learn how to submit form data via post. Since spaces are not allowed in URLs, the browser replaced them with the plus sign. Okay, so if you have a space in it, you're going to get a plus sign right there. So when you tap into the form team name, you type space coders with a space, and because it doesn't accept spaces, it added the plus sign. Now, key value pairs. When a form is submitted, a key value pair is created for each named input. The keys are the values of the name attributes, and they are paired with the content of the value attributes. Forms with two named inputs: label, username, input type text, name, username. Label, team name, input, name, text, it's a type text, name, team. And so here we notice we have two labels. When this form is submitted with the values from the previous example, the query string looks like this right here. So John and team, so remember, separated by this and, this lets you know this is another query right here. So you have the username and you have the John and the team. It's a key value pair. Username is the key, team is the key, John is the value, space coder is the value. Now, the thing is, this button right here, it's connected, all connected, because it's nested inside this form. If this button was on the outside of this form, then this would not work. Play around with that, just to play with the code to understand what will happen if I put this button outside the form and then try to submit it. All right, that's the end of this particular video. Check your understanding. Remember, the more you do, the more you improve. See you in the next section.